Hey everyone, hope you all had a great week. I decided to make a public video before the weekend on my thesis on why I believe that crypto will be a boring asset class over the course of 2022. So to start, here's the look of Bitcoin on the 1 hour chart, and we can see this bullish weekly trigger, monthly trigger crossover. This is the most bullish type of crossover in the trigger system. Weekly trigger, monthly triggers are very bullish. And if I give you some examples of weekly trigger, monthly trigger crossovers, you can see this, I guess, wasn't exactly a bullish trigger cross, but the triggers stacked in the most bullish orientation, the hourly trigger above the daily trigger, above the weekly trigger, above the monthly trigger, means that there are 4 levels of support below price, and no matter where price dips, bulls will step in and algos will step in at any of these levels to support price and to continue the bull run. When the triggers are stacked bullishly, the hourly trigger above the daily trigger, above the weekly trigger, and the monthly trigger, price tends to respond very well to the upside. You can see the same thing on QQQ as well, where the triggers have been stacked bullishly. Here's your weekly trigger, monthly trigger crossover. And since then, although there will be pullbacks and there will be downtrends at some point along the way, in general, price is going to explode to the upside 90% of the time that you have these kind of bullish crossovers. A fan favorite, NVIDIA, as you can see, had its bullish weekly trigger, monthly trigger crossover right here at about 210 at the time, and price was able to move all the way up to 100. We see the same thing in AMD, which recently made a parabolic move, where we had a weekly trigger, monthly trigger crossover. And although it did take some time to explode, sometimes after these crossovers, there'll be a retest of the weekly trigger and the monthly trigger. Eventually, price is going to explode to the upside. Now, if we do take a look at Bitcoin and we look at the last bullish weekly trigger, monthly trigger crossover, so here was the recent one, and price has already been responding pretty nicely. But the last one was down here, where the weekly trigger, monthly trigger is not going to load, but it was just about here. We had that bullish crossover, and Bitcoin was able to make a gigantic move to the upside. So seeing Bitcoin currently in the most bullish trigger orientation, with the hourly trigger above the daily trigger, above the weekly trigger, and the monthly trigger, has me very, very, very bullish on Bitcoin overall. And if we take a look at Ethereum as well, see recently bullish weekly trigger, monthly trigger crossover, and price has recently exploded to the upside. So now that we know that, and Sol, I know a lot of people look at this as well, just had its bullish weekly trigger, monthly trigger crossover. So even if there is that pullback to the weekly trigger or the monthly trigger first before more upside, in general, these setups will lead to tons and tons and tons of more upside. So now that we got, the Bitcoin and Ethereum out of the way, now that we know that crypto itself is looking bullish, let's take a look at crypto miners. So Mara, way back in December 20th, 2020, had its bullish weekly trigger, monthly trigger crossover. If I go to the hourly time frame, you can get a little better view of it. Mara was actually able to explode 500% to the upside after its bullish weekly trigger, monthly trigger crossover. If I do the price range tool, see here was the crossover, and price was able to move very, very nicely to the upside, 400%. Really big move. Recently, Mara had another bullish weekly trigger, monthly trigger crossover, very recently. And price already had that pullback to the weekly trigger, monthly trigger, another pullback here, and you can see the algos are set to buy at the weekly trigger, and it'll more than likely lead the way up. So Mara, being in the most bullish trigger orientation now, with the hourly trigger above the daily trigger, above the weekly trigger, above the monthly trigger, is looking extremely bullish in the long term. Now, sometimes these setups do take a while to pan out. I'm not saying this is going to explode immediately. MemeStockWatch.com does a very good job of forecasting the day-to-day movements of the crypto miners, if you'd be interested in that. But in general, the overall structure of this stock currently is looking extremely bullish. To me, it looks like buying NVIDIA at 200, buying AMD at 100, currently 180. Now, if you look at RIOT as well, RIOT also recently had a bullish weekly trigger, monthly trigger crossover. It was a little sticky with the pullback, but bulls were able to survive it. And now we're stacking the most bullish orientation again, with the monthly trigger on bottom, followed by the weekly trigger, followed by the daily trigger, followed by the hourly trigger. Whenever a stock is in this orientation, we do expect large upside moves over the course of years, not months, years. Sometimes it can be 6 months to a year, But in general, stocks will trend bullishly for a very long time once the triggers are stacked bullishly. So Mara and Riot are looking, really bullish in the long term. Again, day to day, I'm not saying that tomorrow price is going to explode to the upside, but I am saying that this seems like a very worthy investment here. Of course, not financial advice. Look at CLSK as well. CLSK just had its bullish weekly trigger, monthly trigger crossover. And with the triggers now stacked fully bullishly, monthly trigger on bottom, followed by the weekly trigger, followed by the daily trigger, followed by the hourly trigger, large upside is expected for CLSK over the coming year. Here was the last bullish weekly trigger, monthly trigger crossover. And the crossover happened a little bit late. It was price breaking above the monthly trigger that really triggered this explosive move higher. So you had rejections of the monthly trigger as bears tried to hold it down. But once price was able to break above the monthly trigger, it exploded 200% to the upside. Now, coming back to current price exploded above the monthly trigger here, but didn't have that huge explosive move yet. Only moved 100% to the upside, and then it pulled back. Bulls, algos were set to dip by it at the weekly trigger and the monthly trigger. You got also a beautiful bounce off the monthly trigger right here, and that tells you that bulls are now in control of the monthly trigger. So with the triggers now stacked bullishly, it's very reasonable to think that CLSK is going to be able to explode to the upside over the coming year. And when you see all these crypto miner stocks all in the most bullish trigger orientation, you saw the same thing with AI stocks. For example, Palantir recently had a bullish weekly trigger, monthly trigger crossover. Price pulled back to the weekly trigger. Algos were set to buy here, and then shortly after exploded to the upside. And now Palantir looks like it can go on a massive bull run. Of course, probably has to pull back, consolidate for a bit, maybe bounce off the daily trigger and keep going. Palantir is now looking extremely bullish. So seeing all these crypto miner stocks at the same stage that AI stocks and semiconductor stocks were at a year ago has me leaning very, very bullish for the future of crypto miner stocks. Another one that I really like here is Wolf, because it's kind of behind in the cycle. It didn't even get to its monthly trigger yet. With the hourly trigger and the daily trigger now above the weekly trigger, Wolf should be able to explode higher to its monthly trigger over the coming months. Another one that I've been looking at is Hive. And bears did a great job defending the monthly trigger on Hive, but with the hourly trigger and the daily trigger now above the weekly trigger, it seems inevitable that Hive will be able to break out above the monthly trigger in the coming months. So due to the bullish trigger orientation in Mara and in Riot and in Bitcoin, due to all these things, I believe personally that crypto miner stocks are going to be exploding to the upside over the next year. I think that people that don't end up buying it now will severely regret it when crypto miner stocks are 3 to 5 times higher by the end of this year, or possibly even more. You never know. Nvidia, when it was at 200, was clearly extremely bullish based on the triggers, and I would have guessed maybe it can get to 300-400. Here's where the weekly trigger crossed the monthly trigger. I never expected it to move all the way to 700 or 800. So that's 3 to 4x right there. So the future is highly unknown, of course, but based on the structure and based on the trigger orientation of many of these crypto miner stocks, I do believe that crypto miner stocks are going to be the best performing asset class in the year of 2024. I've looked at many different asset classes recently, and not one of them has so many stocks and crypto itself as well in the most bullish trigger orientation. So the future is looking bright for crypto miner stocks, which is why Meme Stock Watch added a module for Mara and Riot, where we track them daily, including Bitcoin, myself and Gavin. And we're able to catch this huge Mara explosion when price broke above the daily trigger. We were able to catch this dip buy at the weekly triggers because we knew the algos were already set to buy here. And hopefully we'll continue to do a great job of tracking Mara as it appears to be about to go on a massive bull run over the coming months, over the coming year. So none of this is financial advice. If you would like daily updates and nightly forecasts and trade ideas on crypto miner stocks, Meme Stock Watch does offer that for only $20 a month, including our live Pmap, where you could go on during the day and check how how they're doing. If you go on the 5-minute chart, you'll be able to see here Bitcoin, Dogecoin. We also have Wolf and Riot and Mara. So currently, they were bearish pretty much all day today. But if you go now to the monthly time frame, you'll see that Mara is actually strong bullish on the monthly time frame, as well as Solana and Ethereum and Bitcoin go down to the weekly time frame as well. See Wolf is still strong bullish on the weekly time frame. Sol, Dogecoin, Ethereum, Bitcoin. So this is a pretty nifty tool if you do like to trade these stocks. And wishing you all the best of luck, and hopefully this thesis will pan out correctly.